I'm Bia, and welcome back to Cardiac Radio for Teens. For those of you who may not know, Cardiac Radio for Teens is a place where teens can come together with other teens and learn about Spiritist teachings and topics in a way that makes more sense and relates to us as teenagers in modern-day society. Last week, we read question 257, which wasn't exactly a question, but it was called a theoretical essay on the sensation in spirits. So this question, it goes on for pages, and we got more than halfway through it. So today, hopefully we'll finish it, and if we have time, we'll move on to something else. So this isn't exactly a question like all the other questions, but it's just an essay. So they're just kind of talking, and we're just going to break it up paragraph by paragraph or piece by piece and make sense of it, of what they're saying. And if you did miss last week's, make sure you go back and listen to that one first, because it'll make a lot more sense. And if you have missed any of them, it makes a lot of sense to go in order. So if you miss one, try and go back and listen to that one, because the book, what happens in the beginning, we learn so that it can help us understand stuff that's later on that might be more advanced, that we need that initial learning. So it's important to go back and make sure we hear every part, because every part is new information for us. So in this essay, we were talking about how spirits sense things, their sensations. So where we left off, the spirit said, "In saying the spirits are inaccessible to the impression of matter, we are referring to the most evolved spirits. Those etherealized envelopes find no analogy in this world. It is different in spirits whose perispirit is denser, because they perceive our sound and our odors, but not via a limited part of their organism as when alive. We may say the molecular vibrations are felt throughout their entire being, and therefore in their sensorium commune, the spirit itself, but in a different manner, and perhaps producing a different impression, which may cause a modification in their perceptions." So right here, this was kind of actually recapping what it was talking a lot about last week. So this is a good little recap. So they were talking about how the spirits, that only the spirits who are very evolved, who are basically pure, they don't have the same senses as us, because they're so pure that our worldly stuff doesn't really affect them. But those who are not yet at perfection, like us when we disincarnate, and people at our level, spirits at our level, they hear sounds like we do, and they smell things, and they have those same senses, but instead of being, okay, you smell things with your nose when you're here on earth, but when you're a spirit, it's not exactly through your nose, but it's like through your whole perispirit. So that's what we were talking a lot about last week. So, because on earth, we have, let's say, our nose, like we were saying, to smell. We have our nose to smell, but the spirit, they don't have this flesh material nose. So for them, it's not going to be directly in the nose area where they're going to smell, but they're just going to have that overall sensation amongst them, not specifically in one place or the other. Then they continue. "They hear the sound of our voice, and yet they can understand us without the need of speech. The mere transmission of thought is sufficient, attesting to the fact that their mental acuity becomes greater in the more dematerialized they become." So right there, they're talking about they hear our voice, but they can communicate without actually having to make a sound with the voice, because they don't have like a physical material throat like we do. So just their transmission of thought, it's kind of like telepathy, their transmission of thought, that's enough for us to understand what they're trying to say. And it becomes, like they said here, the more dematerialized they are. So the further away they are from materials, like the purer they are, the more perfect, the easier it is for them to transmit everything just through thought. Then it continues. The faculty of sight is independent of light. It is an essential attribute of the soul, for which darkness does not exist, and shows itself to be broader and more penetrating amongst those who are more purified. And here they're talking about sight. So for us, when they say for the spirits it's independent of light, for us on earth and incarnated, we're very dependent on light. If it's dark, we can't see. But for them, the faculty of sight, it doesn't matter about the light. Therefore, the soul or spirit possesses within itself the faculty of all perceptions. During corporeal life, these perceptions are obliterated by denseness of our organs. During extracorporeal life, they become increasingly liberated as the semi-material envelope becomes more and more etherealized. So here they're saying again how when we incarnate, these are kind of masked. We don't just have telepathy. We can't just speak with our thoughts all the time. But so when we have these dense material bodies, those traits that we have kind of get masked. They kind of get hidden. But then again, once you're in the spiritual world, and also when you become more evolved, it becomes easier and easier to have those perceptions like that, like they explained. Then it continues. Drawn from the surrounding environment, the perispirit varies according to the nature of the different worlds. In passing from one world to another, spirits change this envelope as we change our clothes when we go from summer to winter or from pole to equator. When they come to visit us, the more evolved spirits assume a terrestrial perispirit, and so their perceptions are similar to those of common spirits. However, all spirits, whether highly evolved or not, only hear and feel what they want to hear and feel. So right there, they're saying that it's from the perispirit, it's from the surrounding environment. So on different worlds, there's going to be different surrounding environments, so they're going to have different clothes. Just like if you go to Brazil, it's going to be very warm, and even when they have cold, us here in the United States, especially up north in the United States, it's not that cold to us. So if I leave here from New York and I go to Brazil, I'm going to change clothes because it's going to be a different weather. If I go from New York to Florida, I'm going to change clothes because it's going to be a different weather. And if I go from New York to Alaska, I'm also going to have to change clothes because there's a different environment. So the spirits, especially the perispirits, they change like clothes. So here we're talking about different places that are all on the earth, but they're going to different worlds completely. And in these different worlds, they're going and changing clothes or they're like envelopes so that it can fit with that type of world. Since they do not have sensorial organs, they can render their perception active or inactive at will. Although there is one thing they are compelled to hear: the counsel of good spirits. So right here what they were saying, and they started saying a little bit before, is that the spirits, they can hear and feel, but they only hear and feel what they want to hear and feel. But while they said over here that one thing that they have to hear, that they're compelled to hear, is what good spirits are telling them. But if someone that's not a good spirit is telling them something, they can just completely block it out. Or if they don't want to feel something, if they know, oh, this is going to make me sad, so they just block it out. So they don't have to hear and feel stuff if they don't want to, unless it's like a good spirit helping them, consoling them, then they're kind of like forced to hear it. Their sight is always active, but they can become invisible to one another. Depending on the class they belong to, they can conceal themselves from those who are less purified, but not from those who are more so. So right there, they're saying again that for those who are less purified than them, that are under them, they can kind of conceal them. They can kind of become invisible to those people so that they don't have to really hear or feel what those people are saying because they're less purified. They're They might not be saying good things to that person, that spirit. But if it's a good spirit or a higher spirit than you, then you can't conceal yourself from them. But you can from the lower spirits. In the first moments after death, a spirit's sight is always dim and confused, but becomes clearer as it frees itself from the body, and can acquire even more clarity than it had during life, including the possibility of penetrating objects that are opaque to us. As for the extension of a spirit's sight into indefinite space, into the future and the past, that depends on the spirit's degree of purity and evolution. So here they're saying that as that moment from the first moments after death. So when you're dying, you're still attached to your body. So as your spirit goes disconnecting from your material body, you start gaining more and more of these perceptions and these sights and your hearing, and it's all becoming a lot clearer as you're disconnecting. And then they said, but when talking into seeing into the future or the past, that depends on the spirit's purification. So of course, most likely the highly purified or perfect spirits are the ones who can see into the future. You might say, this entire theory is not very reassuring. We had thought that, once freed from our dense envelopes, the instruments of our pains, we wouldn't suffer anymore. Now you're telling us that we can continue to suffer, whether it is one way or another, it is suffering nonetheless. Alas, yes, we can still suffer a great deal and for a long time, but we might also no longer experience any suffering at all from the moment we leave this corporeal life behind. So what they're saying here is that, okay, so basically when people think that they're going to end suffering from this life, in the spirit world, that suffering is not going to end. You're still going to suffer one way or the other, even though it's not like, specifically in your arm, you have an arm pain, but you still have that memory of the pain. It's like you feel that pain is there. And it might not be exactly where your arm was, but it might just be an overall feeling of pain. So there is still suffering, but they said we can also not experience any more suffering if we're doing the right thing now. If we're overcoming these goals and obstacles that we have in front of us, and we overcome these things, and we're going to leave that suffering behind, and we won't have to deal with it in the spiritual world. The suffering of this world are sometimes the result of a cause outside ourselves, but more often they result from our own volition. If we trace them back to their origin, we will see that most of them are due to causes we could have avoided. How many ills, how many infirmaries do people owe solely to their excess and ambition? In a word, to their passions. If individuals always lived judiciously and never abused anything, if they always had simple tastes and modest desires, they would save them from many tribulations. The same applies to spirits. The suffering undergo always results from the manner in which they lived on earth. Of course, they will no longer have gout or rheumatism, but they will experience other sufferings that are not any smaller. So, right here what they're saying is that if the suffering in this world that we're feeling now, in most cases, it's due to something we did. So they're saying, like when people do wrong things, when they drink or they smoke or they just maybe do something, cross the street without looking and they get hit, or when they do so many things just without thinking carelessly or just for fun, just for their own interest, then, like they're saying, they're going to infirmaries, they're going to hospitals so many times, so many sicknesses, because you didn't wear a jacket. Now you got sick. So all these little things. But the same is with the spirit. The suffering that happens to your spirit, it's what you did. If you didn't wear a jacket that one time and it was below freezing, then you're going to have a cold. So the suffering is really a result of what we did on earth. Depending on what we did on earth, then that's going to say how much suffering we're going to have in the spirit world. It's going to be from our own actions. We're going to have these consequences. We're not going to have those same physical pains. You're not going to have the sickness that you had from not wearing a jacket, but you're going to have some other type of suffering, some emotional suffering. We have seen that such sufferings are results of the links that still exist between the spirit and matter. That the more the spirit is disconnected from the influence of matter, that is, the more dematerialized it is, the fewer painful sensations it will suffer. Starting with its present life, it depends on the spirit itself to break free from the influence of matter, because it has free will, and therefore the ability to choose to act or to not. Let the spirit conquer its animal passions. Let it entertain no hatred, envy, jealousy, or pride. Let it cease to be dominant by selfishness. Let it purify itself through good sentiments. Let it practice the good. Let it not give to the things of this world any more importance than they deserve. Thereby, even while in its corporeal envelope, it will have purified itself by detaching from matter, and when it leaves the body behind, it will not suffer any longer from its influence. The physical suffering the spirit underwent in the past will leave no painful memory or disagreeable impression, because these affect only the body. The spirit is happy to be relieved of them, and its peaceful conscience will exempt it from all mental anguish. So here, they're saying that if the spirit conquers the passions, if we're talking the physical pains like we said, they're not going to go to the spirit, because you're not going to get that same sickness because we don't have that material body anymore. But the so-called sicknesses like hatred and envy and jealousy and pride, if we get rid of those, selfishness, if we try and get rid of those and we try and be the best that we can be, then when we and become dematerialized, that was a key thing that they said, to get away from matter, to not think that matter is the most important thing, because that's what causes a lot of these things like jealousy. It's because, some material thing, someone has a better car, someone has a better house, or envy and hatred. So a lot of those can be traced back to matter. So if we become dematerialized, if we're not focusing on matter, then, and we're just trying to become better, get rid of these bad qualities and practice the good, then when we're in the spirit world, then it's going to be easy for us to leave all that physical suffering behind, and all that mental suffering that might have hit us will also be left behind. Because maybe if you have a lot of hatred towards one person on earth, or when incarnated, when you disincarnate, you might not have physical pain and suffering from that, but you will have mental pain. You'll be upset or mad, or that you didn't do anything. So if we're doing the right thing, we're going to get away from all those physical sufferings and from mental sufferings of regrets that we might have had on our life. If we do the good thing, we won't regret anything. Concerning this subject, we have questioned many thousands of spirits who belong to every social class and to every position. We have studied them at every period of their spirit life, from the moment they left their body behind. We have followed them, step by step, in that life beyond the grave, in order to observe the changes that had taken place in their ideas and sensations. In this respect, the most ordinary individuals were the ones who furnished us with the most precious elements of study. We have seen that their sufferings are always related to their conduct. They must suffer the consequences. and that this new existence is a source of ineffable happiness for those who have taken the path of good. Hence, it follows that for those who have suffered, it is because they have wanted to, and they have only themselves to blame in the other world as in this one. So here they saying that they studied spirits, lots of spirits, thousands of spirits, and they studied them. And the ordinary ones who were just trying to have a good life and to do the good things, they didn't have a lot of suffering. And okay, maybe they made a few mistakes here and there, and they had to suffer for those consequences of their actions, but they didn't have a lot. But those who they went down the wrong path all the time consistently, they're going to have a lot of suffering, and they're really to blame. They have to, like, when they're trying to blame under their fingers and other people and point fingers, it's not like that. It's their fault, basically, to blame for their suffering, because it's what they did in their previous life that affects how they're feeling now and their suffering. So that was the end of that question, the essay. And the next part of this chapter is called The Choice of Trials. So question 258. While in the errant state and before a new corporeal existence, does a spirit have the awareness and foresight of what will happen to it during its new life? So the question is, so when you're disincarnated and right before a new life, right before you incarnate, does the spirit know what's going to happen in that life or what's supposed to happen in that life? And the spirits answered, the spirit itself chooses the kind of trials it will undergo. Its free will consists in doing so. So the spirit, they choose what kind of trials they want to overcome. They say, okay, I know I have this problem, so I want to face this and this trial so I can try and overcome that. So they do choose what kind of trials they will undergo, and then basically it's up to their free will to see if they're actually going to overcome it or not. And then there's a second part to the question, and it says, then it is not God who imposes the tribulations of life on it as a chastisement? The spirits answered, nothing happens without God's permission, because it was God who established all the laws that govern the universe. You may as well ask why God made such and such a law instead of some other one. In giving a spirit freedom of choice, God leaves it the entire responsibility for its actions and their consequences. Nothing stands in the way of its future. The path of the good or the path of the evil is an open choice. If the spirit succumbs to its trials, there is still the consolation that not everything is lost, because God, out of divine goodness, allows it to start over where it failed. It is necessary to distinguish between what is the work of God's will and what is the work of human will. If a danger threatens you, it is not you who have created it, but God. However, you have willingly exposed yourself to it because you saw it as a way to advance, and God has allowed it to happen. So basically the question was asking, but doesn't God rule what happens and what doesn't? And they said nothing happens without God's permission. Everything in the universe, it's a law of God. But free will, freedom of choice, that's also one of God's laws, that we have this freedom of choice. So there's going to be obstacles, and if you face them, and when you face them, you're going to try and do your best and overcome them. But if you don't overcome them, okay, you made the wrong choice here, but we're going to give you another chance and another chance and another chance until you get it right. So it's not like, oh, you failed and that's it. You may take the wrong chance, you may take the wrong path, but you will have the chance to correct yourself until you finally get it. So that's where we'll leave off today, and next week we'll continue talking more about how we choose our trials that we're going to have in this life. But before we leave off today, I'd like to leave off with our message from the Daily Book of Positive Quotations. feeling versus doing. You cannot make yourself feel something you do not feel, but you can make yourself do right in spite of your feelings. I just don't feel like it, a child whines, and sometimes neither do we. We know that we're supposed to, but we're afraid to do it, or too bored to do it, or we think it's going to be too much work. We assume that good people do the right thing because it's natural to them. That may be true for some, but many of us have to decide to straighten our shoulders, lift our heads up, and do what we know is right, even when we might prefer to whine a little too. I know what I need to do, even if a part of me would rather avoid it. I will do what's right. I'm Bia. Thank you all for listening. This has been Kardec Radio for Teens. Thank you all for listening.